Okay, great. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ivan DeVoe, and with me is one of our clinical directors, Dr. Anibal Gutierrez. He's going to be joining me. He's going to be in charge of the group chat and also providing you any links that you need or answering any questions that you have or reading them out loud or anything like that. So if you do have any questions as I go through the presentation, please feel free to write those in the chat right away so you don't forget, okay? And we'll either try to address those as we go, or maybe we'll wait until the end of the presentation to address some of the questions, okay? We will also have a training evaluation form at the end. And if you were with us last week, we had a little bit of difficulty because we were trying to provide a link, but today we actually have a QR code to make it a little bit easier. And so you can actually do it from your smartphone if that's easier for you, and the form should work in there. It's pretty straightforward. But if not, we'll be more than happy to provide the link for you. So then I think we're ready to get started with all the information that I gave you. And so my name is Ivan DeVoe. I am one of the case managers for the Research and Behavioral Division at UM-NSU CARD. Today we're going to be talking about managing challenging behavior at home. And this is a presentation that we've already done in the past. And so you may have seen it on our YouTube channel, perhaps. We wanted to go ahead and share it again with our families. We wanted to make it available and for them to reconnect with us as we're going through these difficult times, make sure that we answer any questions that they have. The purpose of the presentation really is to kind of explain to parents a little bit of why do behaviors happen in the home. So what are some of the environmental effects and what are some of, any other variables that come into play that may be affecting the child's behavior in the home. And then we're also going to talk about what are going to be some strategies that we can use in order to address some of these challenges and how to easily implement those. Now, one of the things that we always tell families before we start the training is that this is not supposed to be a replacement for, let's say, having a board certified behavior analyst in charge of a case, getting services from an agency and things like that. But rather for you to feel a little bit more empowered and have a little bit more understanding of why your child may be behaving in some ways and how to maybe arrange the environment in a way that might prevent them from engaging in such behaviors. So let's go ahead and get started with our first slide. So I always start my presentations on behavior with this slide because I always like to point out how behavior is just behavior. And there's no such thing as good or bad behavior, but rather, behavior. And we are the ones to give the connotation. And so one of the things that I always explain to families with visuals and stuff is that perhaps a behavior can be very appropriate in a certain environment, whereas it may not be as appropriate in a different environment. So for instance, if you take the top picture here of a child painting in the wall, if your child was engaging in such behavior in their room while no painting is taking place, so if you're not really trying to paint the wall or anything like that and your child's engaging in that, then we would consider this to be an inappropriate behavior. But it's an inappropriate behavior with regards to that specific situation. If instead your child had to do a specific homework where they had to color some drawings or something like that, then that would be considered an appropriate behavior within that concept. And so part of what we want to do in this presentation is start to get you to think in how can some of the behaviors that my child already know be appropriate or inappropriate, regardless, depending on the situation, and how do we manage that? And so how do we teach the child, okay, this may be the appropriate time to engage in something, and how do we teach maybe an alternative response in times when that behavior that they've already mastered is not appropriate. And I have a few more other examples like the yelling, I have, like the raising hand and things like that. And so there might be times when raising your hand is not going to be successful in getting someone's attention. And so those are things to keep in mind, because if your child, for instance, has a very limited repertoire of ways to communicate and ways to get attention, that might be one of the causes for them engaging in problem behavior. If a child has only been taught to get attention by raising their hands, and they're raising their hands when nobody's looking at them, then they're gonna have a hard time getting attention from people, okay? So let's go ahead into our next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what behavior is and how do we define it. And so we have a few different definitions. And I think, the most important one that we always like to pay attention to is that it is the response of an individual, group, or species to its environment. And what we mean by that is that behavior is influenced by the environment around us. And so we are a product of all the things that are going on. So whether it's a noise that's happening right next to us and it's distracting us, whether it's the temperature in the room or the lighting in the room, those are environmental effects that can have a consequence on how we behave. It could also be maybe the way that the environment is set up. So maybe, if you're a child that doesn't have the ability to maybe grasp a pencil or something like that, and you set up an activity where the child has to engage in using a pencil, then this may be a trigger for problem behavior. So start thinking about these things, because as the more that we start to realize how our environment is arranged, then the easier it's going to be for us to make some tiny changes that perhaps could have a very good impact in the future. And we'll talk also about how behavior is basically a form of communication. And so many times when the child's engaging in problem behavior, they're not really trying to, let's say, they're not trying to show an emotion per se. So they're not necessarily doing something because they're upset at you or because they're trying to get you upset, but rather because they have no other way of communicating something. So even in the cases where you have a child that could be potentially have good communication skills, they may not be able to generalize those skills. So maybe a child is very good at communicating with dad, but perhaps he hasn't been able to generalize that and being able to communicate with mom. And so with mom, he might engage in more problem behavior, but it may be just because he's not able to communicate the same needs or wants that he has, that as he's able to do with his dad, And so why does problem behavior occurs? So there are two reasons why problem behavior can occur. One of them is skill deficits. So I was given the example of maybe if you have limited fine motor skills, or it could be, for instance, if you have limited communication, if you have some processing delays or things like that. So those are all different areas that can affect whether or not we engage in problem behavior. The other reason is that it can also result in a positive or payoff reward. So sometimes engaging in problem behavior may be for us to get something that we never expected we would get out of that situation. And so I'll give you a good example of that. It's like if a child is one day feeling very ill and they go to school or they're at home trying to do homework, and because they're feeling really bad, they start crying, and all of a sudden they receive a ton of attention because it looks like they're suffering, like they're hurting or something like that. Then they might very quickly learn that that's a good way for them to get attention out of their parents, attention out of their peers, or even from their teachers. And so we have to pay close attention to the way that we're interacting with the person that we're trying to help, because otherwise we may be the ones to actually contribute to them engaging in problem behavior. And so in terms of skill deficits and problem behavior, there are a few areas that perhaps could affect the likelihood of somebody engaging in problem behavior. And those could be, for instance, the ability to follow instruction. This is going to be closely related to, your language skills. So how much receptive language do you have? Are you able to follow single or two-step instructions, or even, three-step instructions? And these are things to keep in mind, especially for parents now that you're working from home, doing the, assisting with the virtual school and things like that. You want to keep this in mind because your child may have the ability to do many different types of tasks, but the way that you present this demand may have an impact on whether or not they're going to be able to do it. And so if you ask your child to do their homework, they might not know exactly what that means. And so you may have to be more explicit where you say, okay, I need you to first go get your pencil. Then I need you to go get your notebook. And make sure that you're breaking it into little enough steps so they can, pause and actually comprehend what you're trying to ask for them, and they have time to respond to that request. Now, in terms of the language, you want to make sure that the language is as simple as possible also. So you don't want to be using very complex sentences or very fancy words that they're not going to be able to understand, because that's also going to contribute to them getting more frustrated. In terms of the tolerance for delay, a lot of our kids have a hard time waiting, just in general, in any situation. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is maybe how to set up some time aside where we can practice teaching that tolerance for delay, and how important it is to be able to do that. And so a lot of your children may have problems in a regular classroom, for instance, because they want to participate and they raise their hand, and the teacher is asking them to wait, but they keep interrupting the instruction. And so we'll talk a little bit about what are some strategies to address that. And then in terms of the friendship and the empathy, obviously all of our kids are going to be different, but they do seem to have sometimes some common denominators when it comes to their social skills and things like that. And so, for instance, when it comes to friendships, they may have a hard time developing those. Part of that is because sometimes if they do have, let's say, a lot of verbal skills, they may like to be very self-centered in whatever interest that they have. And so, for instance, if they like Thomas the Train, that might be all they talk about. And to the point where not only are they getting people tired from what they're saying, from just talking about that every single time as just being the one topic that they mention, but also because they don't necessarily are interested in listening to anything else. And so if the other child doesn't like Thomas the Train, then it's very little chance for them to engage in conversation. So sometimes this may be interpreted as a lack of empathy, but I would say that it's not a lack of empathy, but rather just a lack of awareness, And these are things, again, that we can try and teach and set up times where we can, do a control environment and sort of like play out the situations where they would have to go back and forth in conversation. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. In terms of the payoff and the reward for the problem behavior, there are a couple of reasons why the problem behavior can happen. Some of the examples that I mentioned at the beginning were the attention and the reaction, and we're gonna go a little bit more into depth as to what that really means and what that would really look like. Another one would be for escape or avoidance. So let's say, for instance, if you're presenting a task that's very, very demanding, the child may engage in problem behavior or make up excuses just to avoid having to engage in something that, number one, may not be preferred for them. Number two, could be something that's just very challenging for them. And so that's also something to keep in mind now that you're working from home with them, is that perhaps you need to feel comfortable presenting tasks that they've already mastered and they're very comfortable with. And so I wouldn't try and, for instance, aim to teach them new skills every day throughout the entire instruction time that you're going to have with them. But instead, maybe break it into little periods of time where perhaps you're presenting something that they're very good at so that they're successful. And then in between, you're sort of like bringing in some of the things that are a little bit more challenging and that you're trying to teach. And this way, it's a little bit easier for them and it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about in terms of payoff and rewards is going to be the access to items or activities. And although this is something that obviously affects every child, and every child at different times may want access to items or activities that they're not allowed to at that time or that are perhaps not available. When it comes to our kids, this is very challenging because they may not have a way of communicating that not only do they want something, but what is it that they want, And so we have to be very, very mindful of this because it can get very frustrating over time when somebody tries to request things from other people and they don't seem to understand it. And one of the things that may be of benefit to some of you with your children is using visual supports, so that even if they have language, they can support that communication engagement with a visual support so that they can assure that you guys would understand them when they're making requests. This is also very beneficial, like in the future, once we're done with this whole situation, just for them to communicate in a better way, even with, let's say, other family members or people out in the community. Because maybe you have gotten used to the types of things that your child requests and maybe the type of speech that they have. But for other people, it may be a little bit more challenging. So it's something to be mindful about also. Now, in terms of successfully reducing the problem behavior, um, we're basically going to do two things. And so we're going to address some of the skill deficits that we mentioned. And so we're going to come up with ways that we can maybe modify the environment, modify the task presentation that we're doing. So how do we modify the work that we're giving the student or the child so that we make it a little bit easier for them, so that we are a little bit empathetic to, what kind of challenges they may have. And then the other thing that we're going to do is that we're going to try and eliminate, hopefully, or if we could even minimize to as much as we can, the rewards to the problem behavior. So part of what we're going to do is that we're actually going to have to look into how we are reacting to when children are engaging in problem behavior. What's happening right before the problem behavior happens, and what are we doing right after it happens? And so how are we maybe contributing to that problem behavior happening again? And that doesn't mean, for parents, it doesn't mean that you're doing a bad job or anything like that, but rather that you're going to evaluate all the time so that we can do things a little bit better, and it's not going to be that from one day to the next, you're going to totally change your parenting style or anything like that. That's not what we want from you. What we do want is for you to have more successful interactions with your child, because the more you do so, the more likely they are to behave in an appropriate way and learn that every time they're engaging with you, whether it's for homework time, whether it's for playtime, it's going to turn into a successful attempt. And that's what we want from them. We want them to understand that you guys are going to be a source of enjoyment for them. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to address those skill deficits. And so we did mention that we were going to start arranging the environment perhaps differently if we needed to. And then we're going to also look at how can we change the instruction? How can we teach in a way that's going to be a little bit easier for them, okay? And so when it comes to the environmental arrangements, part of what we always like to teach parents is that everything that we're trying to do and talk about in this presentation applies to everyone in general. And so environmental arrangements are part of our everyday life. The reason why people can go to and from work is because of environmental arrangements, whether you're taking, subway, whether you're taking a train, whether you're taking, whether you're at an airport, whether you're driving around and you have to follow the signs on the road. This is part of our life, and we want to make sure that our kids are trained, and not only trained, but highly trained to interpret a lot of these signs so they can be successful and independent. A lot of times what happens is that we're not necessarily so aware that once we go into our home, we don't necessarily have things laid out the same way everything's laid out in the community. And the reason being is because it's a place where we already we are comfortable, and we have, our own routines, and we know where everything's located. But when it comes to our children, we have to be a little bit more mindful of that and maybe start thinking, okay, should I maybe lay out what are the steps that we're going to follow when we wake up in the morning? Should I sort of have, little visuals showing which direction we're going to take when we're going to the bathroom, or maybe what's the designated area when we're going to do homework and things like that. And it sounds like, they're very minor changes, but they could have a very positive impact because, number one, they can calm down some of the anxiety that's related to not knowing what's coming next and what the activity, what it's going to entail, but also how long is it going to be for, Is it going to be something that we're going to be doing for the next 5 minutes? Or is it going to be something that we're going to be doing for an hour? And a lot of the anxiety and the problem behavior related to doing, schoolwork and things like that is going to come from that. So part of what you want to do when you're arranging the environment is having visuals that specifically explain when an activity begins and ends and what's coming after that activity, so that the child can know, okay, this is what I'm working for, and this is what's coming after that. And that really, it really helps them feel a little bit more motivated and feel like you're working with them towards the success. And so there are many ways that you can provide visual support. And one of them can be that you can have a visual schedule of the activities that you're going to be doing throughout the day. For some children, this may work as a more general layout of everything that they're going to do. But for some children, you may have to have sort of like a general routine that they have to follow and refer to. And then in each section or area of the house where they're going to engage in each activity, you may have to have an analysis of what it is that they're going to do. And this is just one example, but these visuals can look very different, and you can cater them to whatever functional level of the child. Even if you have, let's say, an adult, you can use actual pictures. So you don't have to be using these visuals that maybe look a little bit childish. So be mindful of that. This can always be changed. You could have it where it's just text and have a checklist, and it doesn't have to be necessarily hung in a wall or anything like that, so that the person doesn't feel like they're being treated differently. Let's say if they have siblings, it could be a document that they carry with themselves. And here are some other examples of visual support. So, besides having that visual schedule, you can have things like a choice board. And one of the benefits of having a choice board is that you're giving the person the ability to make a decision. This is a very, very important skill that oftentimes we don't teach quite a lot. And the problem is that when we don't teach people to make decisions, um, they don't become independent. And so even if you have a child that's nonverbal, or whatever challenges they may have, you need to try and promote them making choices. Now, for some children, it might be hard to discriminate between different visuals, and so they may make choices that are not the ones that they were intending to make in the first place. But by trial and error, and by you providing, oh, you requested this, and giving it to them, and then them saying no, they can start learning, um, you know, to discriminate between these visuals, and learning that sometimes, you make a decision that you like, and sometimes you make a decision that doesn't go so well, and it's fine, and it's not the end of the world. And so these are these are very important skills to start building, kind of like embedding into everything that you're doing throughout the day. The other option about, the other good benefit of having choice boards is that you can also start expanding the amount of activity that somebody's interested in. And so you can start introducing little by little new things to see how that person reacts to them. And so, I think sometimes when people look at choice boards, they kind of go, well, my child will go to whichever one they like the most. And so that's not the way we're going to try and use this, but rather we're going to put in a few activities that perhaps are moderately preferred, as opposed to maybe being like the most desired one, so that they're competing with each other. And then on top of that, what we're going to do is that perhaps if your child says, I want to watch a video, and then you take that off the visual, then that's no longer an option. So next time that they go up to their choice board, they have to choose from whatever's left there. And so you're promoting them, being flexible and kind of working with whatever's available in the environment. Another thing that you can do is that you can use, you know, this token economy that we have here. So you can have a little visual where kids can earn, like, let's say, stars, or they can earn what we would call tokens. And they don't have to look like this. It could be anything. For some kids, it's just earning, a dot or something like that. For some kids, it may be earning cards or visuals of a toy that they really like. But the idea behind this is that we can overextend the amount of time that somebody can perform work. And so if a child has a very, very hard time getting engaged in, like, let's say, doing their homework, or maybe going to the bathroom or things like that, then what you can do is that every time they perform one task, they can earn one of these tokens. And so that way they can sort of feel like every attempt that they're doing has a return value, where it's like, they're earning something for every time that they put in effort. And then once they've completed however many tokens they have to earn, whether it's 5, whether it's 3, whether it's 1, then they get the access to whatever reward that it is that they want. And so the cool thing about this is that you can play with how many attempts do they have to get in order to earn the most desired reward. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that at the beginning, you don't want to add in too many attempts because the child is not going to be familiar with this process. And so what you want to do is that perhaps you want to do it where the child only needs to earn 2 tokens, and as soon as they do, they get access to something. And at the beginning, don't be so worried about them doing things perfectly, but rather about them encountering reinforcement. So, you know, reinforce for any attempt that they do, and then you can worry about shaping whether or not that attempt was as good as it was supposed to be, you know? And again, this is something that you can tailor to whatever need that you have, and it's something that will be very beneficial for them to become independent in the future. Because if they are able to manage this sort of system, then they can be providing reinforcement to themselves while you're, let's say, working on your laptop and doing your own work that you're doing remotely. So think about maybe implementing this little by little and see how it works for you. And then the other thing that you can do is that you can use a visual like this one that's far more simple. And it just says, I am working for, let's say, first I'm gonna do wash my hands, and then I'm gonna eat a snack. And so make sure that if you're trying to get some compliance in terms of some activities that seem to be very challenging for the child, then you're presenting something that's very rewarding right afterwards, okay? And so I think the example I just gave is a good one because of the situation that we're in right now. So if you're trying to promote more hand washing and things like that, then you're gonna have to think about what is in it for them, you know? It's not gonna be like they're just gonna be washing their hands just because you say they need to wash their hands. And I know that in an ideal world, you would be like that, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, when I grew up, the way I was raised, I did whatever my parents told me. But I always say to my family is that our kids are just a little bit smarter than everyone else. And so they wanna, they don't put in work for for the same amount of reward that most people do. They want more than that. If they could get paid for everything that they do, they would, trust me. So keep that in mind as well, you're gonna have to really figure out how to keep them happy. And if you do find the things that they're really motivated for, if you're very clear as to what your expectations are, then you would see a lot of change in terms of their compliance and the amount of effort that they're gonna be putting in for work. Now, also, some of the things that you can do in terms of visual supports around the home is that you can have what we call a task analysis of different things. And so this is what we call a total task. And so this has all the steps needed to complete an activity. And I have the example of toothbrushing with 2 very different visuals, one of which has, for instance, here on the left, sort of like 5 main steps. And then within those steps, there's sort of like mini steps that are embedded that are part of each single step. So if you look at, let's say, like number 3, where it says brush my teeth, you would have, that first you would do the top teeth, then the bottom, then the front, the outside, and then the inside. So this is something that perhaps you would use for somebody that has already a better ability at being independent and has mastered the toothbrushing a little bit better, but may need some reminders at different times as to what are some of the steps they shouldn't forget. And then if you're trying to teach from like, let's say, the beginning, then what you can do is that you can break it into every single step, like we have here on the right. And the idea behind that is that you have the opportunity to reinforce every single instance. And so even if a child, let's say, is not able to brush their teeth because of a sensitivity issue or anything like that, maybe they are able to throw away the floss, or maybe they are able to wet the toothbrush. And so you can reinforce those instances. So even if they're not able to complete the entire sequence and you have to help them with a couple of those steps, they can still feel like they're doing great and that they're getting so much attention from you and reinforcement because they're trying and they're completing some of those little steps. And little by little, they can start, accruing more and more steps until they get closer to the end goal. And at the end, we're gonna have a link where you can access a lot of these visuals. so that you can print them out or you can modify them as you need to for your home, okay? And if you still, like, let's say, if you're a person that's not very technological savvy or something like that, then don't be afraid. You can contact us. You know, you can either reach out to me, or if you know you're a assigned car clinician, you can reach out to them and you can let them know, look, I need some assistance creating one of these visuals, and we're more than happy to help, okay? Go back to the top. And then I think another thing that's important to mention is timers. And in some cases, to be fair, some kids may not react very well to timers because it may signal for them that a very desirable activity is about to end. So what you want to do is that you want to use timers specifically for activities that are non-desirable, you know, because you want to sort of point out this is not going to be forever. I'm only going to require you to maybe work for 5 minutes, or maybe for 2 minutes. And then once the timer's done, you can have access to a break or something that you really desire. And then perhaps you can give an advance notice when you're moving from a very desired activity to something else. One of the things that we always mention to parents to keep in mind is that if you're trying to transition from something that's very desirable to something that is not, you're gonna have a very, very hard time with compliance. And so it doesn't really matter if you use a timer or if you use an advance notice or you're saying in 2 minutes, we're gonna start doing X, Y, and Z. That may not be enough for the child. And so what you wanna do is that when you're working on that schedule, you wanna make sure that you're sort of balancing and that you're not going from something that's very, very desirable to something that's very, very challenging. And so maybe if you're gonna build in an iPad break at some point, maybe you should build that iPad break maybe right before a snack, or maybe right before an activity that's not so challenging, whether it's you know, doing an independent station, or maybe doing something like a coloring or something that they enjoy, so that you know you're able to transition in a way that's not so drastic to them. Okay, so keep that in mind and sort of figure out what might be best for you and where you can build in some of these more desirable times. If you feel like you can't seem to balance it out, then perhaps it would be beneficial to just leave things that are too desirable, like the tablets or any other games, for a time when you're not going through the schedule, and just build in breaks where you have you know, sort of like moderate reinforcements so that you don't have such a hard time with the transitions. And then another thing that you want to keep in mind is how you arrange the room. And so the way that we arrange furnitures and walls and visuals can have a strong impact on how things are perceived. And so you want to signal very clearly what are the boundaries. And so, you know, where am I supposed to be right now? And so just because you see a desk doesn't mean that that's the place to work. You can use a desk for multiple things. You can use a desk to play with your Legos. You can use a desk to be drawing, or many other things. And so you want to make it very specific. And that's why we talked about having visuals for, like, if maybe you want a certain designated area of the house to be for work, then you can put a visual where the kid can match. And so when they're supposed to do an activity, they know to take, let's say, that red circle to where the other red circle is in the house. And that way they know where they're expected to be. And they can little by little be more independent as far as navigating the different areas of the, you know, the room or the house in terms of what they're supposed to be doing. You also want to make sure that the spaces are very inviting. And so be mindful of, again, what are the child's challenges, or even, let's say, does my child likes to sit down? If your child doesn't like to sit down on a chair and on a table, then maybe you should consider having a little bit of a beanbag. You know, is it an activity that we need a desk for? If it's not, then, you know, be flexible about allowing them to be more comfortable so that they feel like, okay, so I'm not required to do two things. I'm only required to do work, but I'm not required to also sit up straight. Because the problem is, if you're placing too many demands all at once, then the child is just going to have a meltdown. They're going to feel like, well, wait a second, I thought you asked me to work. Now you're also asking me to sit up straight. And then on top of that, you're asking me to be quiet. And so how many things do you want me to do at once? And so be mindful of that as well, okay? Um, and then think about the amount of materials that you're going to have available. The less stuff you have available, the easier it is, the more clear it seems that, okay, this is where I'm expected to do. And so make sure that you only have whatever is needed out in the table or in the nearby area so that there are no distractions. If there are no distractions around, you don't have to necessarily be blocking the student or the child from going away to a different area, you know, or maybe requesting things that aren't supposed to be used at that time. Also think about not only the amount of materials that are in the area, but also how many materials am I giving out? So in terms of like, you know, how many activities am I going to give out at once? You know, so be mindful of that. How do I spread out things so it's not all at once? So it doesn't seem like now all of a sudden we have to be working for the next 30 minutes. And so if you're presenting uh, uh, a sheet with work, let's say math problems or something like that, then perhaps you can signal with a marker or something, we're only going to do the first two problems and then we can take a break, you know? Um, but don't just say it with your verbal instruction, actually signal it and show it visually so that it's easier for the child to comprehend, okay, this is what you mean by what you're saying. And then make sure that you follow through with that, okay? And then just make sure that everything is organized so that the child is not necessarily having to get up and look for things because they're not where they're supposed to be. And so try to have everything available right away for when you need it. You always want to you always want to go ahead and clarify the rules and the expectations ahead of time. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that every activity and every designated time may have different rules and expectations. And so it may not be enough for you to feel like, well, my child knows how they're supposed to behave at school. Yeah, they know how to behave at school in a classroom. But when they're at home, they don't know how they're supposed to behave like they were supposed to behave at school in the classroom. So you're going to have to teach that. You know, you're going to have to teach, well, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., we're going to pretend like we're in school and we're going to follow these rules. And you may have to every single day in the morning lay out these rules that you're going to have in the house from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Okay? And some of the things that you may want to include in there is like, uh, where are we going? So are we going to be in the room? Are we going to be in the living room? Where are we going to be doing this work? You know, what are we going to be doing there? So what specific kind of work are we going to be doing there or activity? Are we going to the bathroom to brush our teeth? What is that really going to look like? Why are we going there? Why does it need to be there specifically? You know, so if we're gonna eat, we're probably gonna go sit at the table. You know, if we're gonna go make a snack, if we're working and trying to learn how to make a snack, then we're gonna go to the kitchen. Who else is gonna be there? Am I gonna be working with my siblings, or am I gonna be working just with you, or am I expected to work by myself? These are things that you also want to address. Because otherwise it's just kind of, you know, these are things that they're going to be wondering and it can contribute to their anxiety a little bit. How long will this activity last? And obviously these are things that can change. Um, but for the most part, you want to be clear. Well, you know, we're going to take a break after you do um, two parts of your worksheet, or we're going to take a break after the timer goes off after 3 minutes. And this is something that can change over time. So as your child becomes more and more independent, where they seem to master some of these skills better, where they can follow the schedule and kind of take on more activities because they're getting reinforcement from the token economy, then you can sort of like extend this amount of time. And then what happens afterwards? So after we're all done with doing this work, what do I get in return? What's in it for me? How many times do I get a reward out of this? So, you know, remember to always lay out the behavioral expectations and rules. And you're gonna have to be careful as to how you lay those out because sometimes we may miss certain pieces of information, okay? And so if at the beginning you lay out a rule and your child finds a loophole to that rule, don't be upset and instead honor the fact that they found the loophole and then the next day just change the rule so that they can't find that loophole anymore, okay? And it'll be a, you know, it'll be a work in progress and it's fine. They're not expected to, from one day to the next, be able to run a school in your house. Then the other thing is, um, how are they going to be able to get help? So if you're working, for instance, who are they going to be asking for assistance when they need it? And how are they going to be asking for assistance? So if you're on the phone on a conference call, how are they supposed to come and ask you for assistance? So if you don't want them to yell, if you feel like they're engaging in problem behavior in the middle of you having a video conference or something like that, then you're going to have to be the one to provide them the tools as to how you're expecting them to request for that attention. And you're going to have to practice that with them, because telling them what they're supposed to do is not going to be enough. They're going to need some practice, and they're going to have to learn that when they do it that way, it results in them getting more than what they do when they don't do it that way. So we have to sort of teach them, okay, the appropriate way leads to more fun, more reinforcement than the inappropriate way. And then there's going to be some naturally occurring teaching opportunities. Sometimes it would be great for you to take advantage of these times. And we'll go over what are some of the things that you should do in those situations. But don't feel like you always have to do this, okay? This specifically applies perhaps for times when the child is not engaged in problem behavior, okay? If a child, for instance, is very, very upset, you're not gonna wanna try and make it a teaching opportunity. Instead, what you wanna do is help them towards calming down, redirect them if you need to, offer some options, and then once the child is, back to being calm, then we can represent whatever it is that they were having a hard time with. And then if you're noticing that they really have a hard time asking for help, or they have a hard time saying, I'm tired, things like that, then you're gonna have to practice that at off times, because once they reach that point, they're not gonna be able to follow your instructions very well. It doesn't matter how much reinforcement you have available. So keep that in mind, because it might be that you're trying to practice certain things and introduce some new skills at times when it's just too difficult for them. And it doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to learn them or that you're doing anything wrong, but rather that perhaps it's just better to practice them at times when it's not so demanding for them, okay? So let's say you do find something where you can teach at the moment. So maybe like asking for permission, or maybe, if they're going to be interrupting you for help or something like that, that might be a naturally occurring teaching opportunity. So what you're going to do is that you notice what the problem behavior is. So whether it's that they're kind of yelling, whether it is that they're hitting their sibling or something like that, so that you can come over and see what's going on, and then you're going to identify the skill that the child should be doing instead. You're going to provide some instruction as to how you're going to do this desired behavior. So you can model this for them. You can show them exactly what they're expected to do. And then you can ask them to do it after you model it. And you can, okay, now it's your turn. And you can sort of like guide them as to do it. And you can be like, oh, great job. You're going to start providing some feedback as to what they're doing great, what they could do differently, but always in the most positive way possible. So you're always going to point out, okay, nice job trying to do it this way, and be specific as to what it is. So nice job raising your hand this time. Nice job trying to raise your hand. Maybe if a child doesn't have the motor skills to maybe raise it the full way, then we're not going to really get caught up on the fact that they should be raising their hand all the way to the top. Rather be like, well, nice job trying to raise your hand. I love that you did that. And then you're going to provide repeated practice until the desired behavior starts occurring. Now, obviously, we're going to praise and provide success. Every time there's success, we're going to be providing praise. But one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that just because they're doing great when we're rehearsing this doesn't mean that they're going to be able to immediately transfer it to the real life situation, okay? And so you're going to have to be a little bit patient and, kind of like just follow through with the guidance and the demonstrations and the feedback and the praise, okay? You don't want to get caught up in the, we already taught you this, or remember how we did it. No, just be like, oh, okay, let me help you, and redirect them, or maybe prompt them physically if they need to, so that they can be successful. A lot of the times, when we notice a child doing something that they're not supposed to, we tend to provide quite a lot of attention, and we tend to get really frustrated, especially if it's something that we've been working on for quite a while. So you want to be very mindful of that, because these are sometimes the ways by which we end up reinforcing problem behavior. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to eliminate and minimize those rewards that I just mentioned, so that example. And so there are four possible functions for why behavior happens. And you've probably heard this before, whether it's through your BCBA or through other trainings. And it's basically escape, tangible, which is, access to any items or toys or anything like that. It could be a snack, whatever it may be. And then it can be attention, which can come from the peers, from yourself. It can come from many different, aspects. And then also the automatic function. And the automatic function, we're not going to get so much into. The automatic function typically requires a little bit more in-depth analysis of why it might be happening. And so if you do find yourself in a situation where your child's engaging in problem behavior, maybe some serious self-injurious behavior, things like that, for sensory reasons, or because they're just really, really frustrated. And that's a red flag that shows you that you should contact us. You should definitely reach out to us. You should let us know that this is going on. If you have a behavior analyst assigned to you, if you already have an agency that's providing services, they should be aware of this also. But in any case, you should always reach out to us, because that's something that requires quite a lot of attention. If this is something that you ignore, it could potentially become worse over time. And so we get a lot of cases where kids are very little and they engage in things that they're not supposed to be doing, but because they're little, it looks cute, and we don't pay too much attention to it. We can manage them in a physical way if we needed to. So we can totally block them from engaging in behaviors they're not supposed to, even though there might be a safety concern or an aggressive concern or anything like that. But what ends up happening is that if we're not able to minimize those behaviors and the reinforcement to those behaviors, then over time, the reinforcement history is going to be so extensive that we're going to have a very, very difficult time trying to teach a replacement behavior by the time it becomes a problem. And so keep an eye out for some of the things that perhaps you feel like they don't look so good, but they're acceptable because your child's still very little. If you have some concerns about that, also reach out to us and let us know so that we can start troubleshooting and brainstorming how are we going to be addressing those in the future so that they don't become a bigger problem. And so in terms of escape, so basically it's very straightforward. A child may engage in problem behavior to escape or get away from a person. So maybe if they don't want to be presented work from someone, they might run away from that person. So if they know that, let's say mom is the person that always requests work from them, then as soon as mom is calling their name, they may sort of like run off into the other room, or they may try to engage in problem behavior to avoid the situation that's coming next, because they know that mom is a signal for, let's say, homework time. Also a task. So they may try to escape or get away from a task. So whether it's the presentation of an actual worksheet, whether it's the presentation of something that's very difficult, like tying your shoes, any sort of like, dressing yourself up, maybe even going to the toilet if that's very challenging for them. These are things that can result in problem behavior, and they can result in escape. And then also the environment, they may want to escape. Let's say if there's something on TV that's a bit scary for them, or the TV's too loud or something like that, they may want to escape that environment at different times. And it doesn't mean that they don't want to engage with you guys. Perhaps they don't have the ability to express, I'm not comfortable with the sounds, or I'm not comfortable with the smell of this food, or something like that. It's usually going to be in response to any of these things. But most likely than not, it's going to be in terms, related to them not wanting to perform an activity or a demand, okay? Then you have the tangible function. And so This is going to be to get access to any specific item or activity. You know, I could tell you that for the most part, it's just going to be for them to get access to the things that they love the most, or for the things that maybe they don't have access to anywhere else. So yeah, at school, they may try to get access to computer time because they're not allowed to do that at home, for instance. And so they may really try to do that through many different ways. And they might find out very quickly that if, you know, there's 10 of us here, 10 students, and my teacher is very busy giving instruction to one, as soon as I start misbehaving, my teacher's going to send me to go work on the computer, which is exactly what I want. And so keep that in mind so it doesn't happen to you in the home too. So that maybe because you're juggling between a couple of children, you don't end up always giving access to something that they want as a way to get them distracted. If you're going to offer that as an option, you should offer that as an option from the beginning, not once the child engages in problem behavior. So once a child engages in protest or something like that, you shouldn't give access to these items, okay? If you already said that wasn't available, then provide a different option. This is usually going to occur when something has been denied or taken away. So like I mentioned, you know, if you said this is not available right now, you may get some problem behavior. Or if all of a sudden you remove something, let's say you're saying, okay, we're gonna sit at the table to eat, so there's no more iPad, and you remove the iPad, you might get some problem behavior in that situation. So start thinking about, you know, what are some ways to maybe help with that transition? Should I even have iPad available before, right before a food time? Because if it's going to become a problem, I don't want my child to miss the opportunity to eat if that's already a challenge for them. Or do I need to have a timer? Do I need to let them know, okay, we're going to do this for X amount of time? Or can you be flexible? Is there a time in the day where maybe they can eat while they're using the iPad, even if it's not every single time? That's going to be up to you, and everybody's going to be different. You know, we're, once again, well, one of the things that we're trying to do here is just trying to help you on how to arrange the environment so it works to your benefit. But we don't want you to feel like we're trying to tell you how to do your job. And every parent has a different style, and every child's going to be different. So you have to, it has to be a combination of some of these tools with combination of what you know about your child and what you think is going to be best. And then the big one, attention. So, you know, children in general always want attention. I think people in general always want attention. In today's day, through social media, we can see that even adults are crying for attention all the time. And whether it's from other adults, whether it's from, you know, peers, whether it is, you know, anything really. So keep this in mind, because sometimes if you're having a hard time understanding why a child may be searching for you at all times, and you're like, well, how much attention can they really want? We live in a world that's based on that, okay? And they don't have an iPhone, perhaps, where they can be looking at Facebook and Instagram. So their way of getting attention is going to be pretty old school, even though sometimes it seems very demanding. One of the things I always talk about is that attention can be a reprimand. And that's very, very important to remember. So the attention, when it comes to problem behavior, can actually function, can be counterproductive. And so when somebody engages in something that we don't approve of, and we react to that in a negative way, or we yell, or we change our tone of voice, or we make a strong noise, or maybe you know, we ask somebody like, why did you do that? Or are you okay? All of these things can have a negative consequence when it comes to problem behavior. So whether it's that a child hits their sibling and you go like, what happened? Are you okay? Even though you're trying to be a parent and sort of like figure out the situation, if the child's actually doing this for attention, you have to be careful, because you don't want them to learn that that's going to be the easiest way for them to get you to stop doing whatever it is that you're doing. Now, the other thing that's also important to point out is that by nature, we tend to pay a lot more attention to things that are negative. I always tell families and parents that in your job place, nobody comes to your desk or shoots you an email every day or every hour or so telling you like, hey, you're doing a great job. I love that email that you sent. That doesn't really happen very often. But if you send an email that you didn't do the spell check on, or or if you forget a deadline about something, um, for sure you're gonna get someone call out, call you out and be like, listen, what happened here? And so we tend to provide more attention to things that are negative. It's just natural to us. And what we are trying to teach you here is to sort of do the opposite. Try not to go on that impulse of giving attention to what's negative, but instead try to only give attention to the things that are positive, that are perhaps happening before this, challenging things are going on. And so typically there's a lot of million things that are happening that are positive that we don't take the time to give praise for. And so one of the things that we're gonna be talking about later is how to do that, is how to find the time to tell a child, I love that you're sitting down calmly while you're eating your food, or I love that you sat down on your own today, or I love that, that you were ready to brush your teeth, even if they didn't start on their own. Just the fact that maybe um, they walked to the bathroom and they waited for you there, things like this. And it goes a long way. They want to be noticed. They want you to see when they're doing something, okay? Another thing that you want to keep in mind is that even if you're, let's say, not responding in a verbal way to a lot of this adaptive behaviors, attention can be a look. And so just the way that we look at somebody, that can say a lot. And especially if our kids are nonverbal, they base themselves a lot of body language, and they can interpret that very, very well. And so, if you're very upset, perhaps, just take a break or something like that. But try not to give any sort of attention, no looks, nothing like that. There's a very funny video that sometimes they include in presentations where a child drops himself and he starts crying, and then as soon as the parent keeps walking and turns around like the hallway where the child can't see him, the child gets up, walks a little bit more, and as soon as he can see the parent in his view, he drops himself again and starts crying. And so even in those cases, you don't want to provide attention to things like that, okay? And in those cases, it's just that look. So instead, what you want to do is maybe provide attention when they're calm. And be like, oh, I love that you're calm. Or maybe provide attention when they're smiling or doing something else, okay? And obviously, this is going to be very easy to figure out in the sense that this happens when a specific person is present. So keep that in mind. Normally, if problem behavior is happening when people are not present, that's not necessary. That's probably not related to attention. So attention is going to be usually when someone's present. Okay. Now, in terms of the treatment, what we're going to do is that we're going to avoid giving the reinforcer after the problem behavior occurs. The first thing that we need to do is that we need to identify what that reinforcer is, and so, the same way that we're trying to avoid giving the reinforcer that we have promised, we want to also identify what is it that we're given in exchange when the problem engages in problem behavior that we shouldn't be given also. And so whether it's that attention, whether it's that escape, so we want to prevent us from being able to provide that. Obviously, you want to give the reinforcement when the appropriate behavior occurs, so you want to make sure that again, even if there's an attempt, even if it's not at a time when you're conducting the skill training or where you're conducting homework time or whatever, just reinforce out of the blue, whenever they do it. The same way when a child first throws in their first few words and they say dada or mama or something like that, and you throw a huge party, it's the same way we're going to keep doing it for everything that they do at any random time. And then remember that in order to come up with a treatment, we're going to have to identify the function. And so we're going to have to think about any of those 4 functions that we just spoke about to kind of get a sense of, okay, what is the alternative behavior that I need? Because unless your alternative behavior matches the function of the problem behavior, meaning that if you're engaging in throwing yourself on the floor because you want attention, then if I want my child to learn to call me by my name when they want attention, then I need to give them attention. If instead of giving them attention, I give them an iPad, then they're going to keep continuing to engage in problem behavior. because that's not attention. That's access to tangible. And so keep that in mind when you're trying to come up with some of these replacement behaviors, because there needs to be a match there in order for it to be successful. And then, in terms of escaping and avoiding the work, think about if the problem behavior occurs when the child is asked to do non-preferred tasks. Is it always when you're asking them to do something like take a shower or clean the dishes or take out the trash or, anything really in the house, clean up the room, anything like that? If it is, then it's probably a good sign that it's they're doing it for escape or for avoidance. And then does it actually result in that? I mean, is there actually a delay because they engage in problem behavior? So for instance, do you end up just getting upset at them and telling them like, you know what, forget it, I'll do it myself? So do they get out of that situation because they engage in problem behavior, because they give you a hard time? Or those that at least buy them time, if they make a mess when they're eating and they throw the food on the floor, does that actually prevent them from having to eat most of their plate, things like that. And then in terms of attention, we're going to have different types of attention. So one of them can be the adult attention. Does it occur when the adult is engaged with another child or activity? So do you see that one of your children or some of your children, do they engage in problem behavior when you're giving attention to another one of your child? So this is something to keep in mind. Especially, we know that some families have more than one child with an autism diagnosis, and so it can get pretty tricky in terms of managing the attention. It can be pretty straightforward with if, let's say, you have one child that's more low functioning, and they learn that the only skill that they have is that they get your attention by pinching you or pulling your shirt, then your other child may start behaving that way because they feel that seems to be pretty successful for the one that requires more attention. And so keep those things in mind. And then also, does the actual problem behavior result in the adult attention? So is a child going to be getting reprimanded or lectured every time they engage in this? Because if they are, then again, they might love that. Even though for you it seems like a negative experience, for them it seems like they have you all to themselves. You're not arguing with their siblings, you're not arguing with your boss or anybody, you're just arguing with them. So they love it. It's this time just to be catered for them. So be mindful of that. In terms of peer attention, and we'll refer to peer attention as maybe sibling attention today for the purposes of the current situation. So problem behavior occurs when the siblings' attention is diverted, like we said, and does the problem behavior result in the sibling getting a laugh, giving a laugh or a complaint? This may happen quite often in some of your homes where probably I would say even when you're typical children, they tend to engage in some level of play that's not appropriate because it's rewarding to them, because they love to see their sibling, their brother or their sister being tortured, or they love to see them get desperate or something like that. And it doesn't mean that they're trying to, inflict pain on them or anything like that, the same way that it was sort of harmless for many of us growing up. But rather that's the only skill that they have, the same way that like when kids are little and a boy likes to they punch each other as opposed to maybe going and trying to talk and say like, oh, you look really cute or something like that. So then we have to teach the skills. We have to teach our children, how to maybe communicate with their siblings and say, oh, I want to play with you, or can I please have a minute by myself? How to also give compliments to the siblings, because maybe they don't know how to give any compliments. So we have to be the ones to teach that. So again, things to think about in terms of replacement behaviors. And then in terms of getting access, does the problem behavior occur when, when the access to the preferred items or activities is restricted? So if you're hiding the candy away because they've been eating too much candy during these days, is that a source of problem behavior? If when they do engage in that problem behavior, do they get access to these things anyways? So for instance, if they do start driving you nuts, would you be like, you know what, I'll give you one more because whatever, just I need to get back to work. So here's one more lollipop or something like that. Then, these are things to be mindful, because if you had already established that it was not a time for a lollipop, and then when the child engages in problem behavior, you go ahead and provide the lollipop, and they're going to learn that um, that's the way to work around you, that you only give access to things when they get upset. So keep that in mind, okay? And again, it doesn't mean that you need to now deprive them from everything. You can always offer alternative access to alternative things, but you want to make it contingent on doing work. And sometimes that work may be different. It's not going to be the same level of work that perhaps uh, they seem to have a challenge with, but at least get some compliance prior to giving access to reinforcement. And then once you get some compliance in and the child's come down, then go back to whatever contingency you had in place. And then we talked a little bit about the sensory. So if any of you are joining us a little bit late on the presentation, we just wanted you to know that please reach out to us if you're having any SIB going on at home. So that's any self-injurious behavior. If your child seems to be very sensory seeking and it's engaging in behaviors that don't seem to make sense, that don't seem to be for attention or for escape or to access to items, like, if they're hitting their head against the wall, if they're scratching themselves or like biting their arms and things like that, please reach out to us. Reach out to your BCBAs as well and let them know that this is going on, even if it's very minor. Even if you have a child that seems to be pretty calm, and when they're upset, they pretend to hit themselves even though they don't hit themselves hard. These are behaviors that can potentially become very problematic over time. So it's very good to catch them at an early time, okay? Now we're going to talk a little bit about what are some strategies for managing the challenging behaviors. And so we talked about using positive language. So part of this is that we're going to tell the child what to do instead of what not to do. So we're going to try and abuse using that word no, because it has a negative connotation to it. And what ends up happening is that when you use the word no so many times, it has this value to it. And it's, you can very easily start associating the word no with here comes punishment. And so sometimes if you're not careful and you use language with the word no in it, you may be signaling to your child that a punishment is coming when it's not. And then that might trigger them to engage in problem behavior. They might feel like you're about to remove something from them, even though you're not, because you're saying, no, you're not supposed to do that. And so instead, what we're going to do is that we're going to keep a calm and neutral facial expression. And then we're also going to keep a calm tone. So we're always going to try and not change when the problem behavior occurs, but rather we're going to, ignore the problem behavior and redirect and sort of focus on what it is that we want them to do. And so if a child's starting to escalate and get upset, we can go up to them prior to them engaging in the behavior that we don't want them to do. And we can be like, hey, listen, it looks like you're getting a little bit upset. How can I help you? You need some help? And you can prompt them to requesting the help from you. So you can catch them right before they engage in these challenging behaviors and be the one to coach them through what it is that you're expecting them to do. And a lot of times the redirection is all that it takes. If a child might be having a hard time with one of their siblings because they don't want to share the toy with each other, all it takes is like, oh, come, let me show you. I have something cooler. Come over here. And just redirecting them to a different place for them to play with something else. Sometimes that is the best option, until maybe you have another situation where both parents are present, and then you can kind of coach and, sort of like start modeling what the appropriate way of playing and taking turns would look like. But in the specific moment, it's just better to redirect and avoid them having to engage in the problem behavior, okay? You also want to catch the child behaving appropriately, like we mentioned before, and you want to be doing this constantly, at any point, whether it's in the shower, when you're helping them get changed, when they're about to go to bed, anytime, make them feel like you always seem to be catching them doing something good, because it's going to make them feel like they're a rock star. And that's exactly what you want. You want them to feel like you seem to be the person that thinks the highest of them. And even though you already are, you have to constantly remind them of that, okay? And so you have to not only feel all that love that you have for your child, but find ways for them to realize, wow, this person seems to think everything I do is pretty cool. And if you find all those times to create those positive opportunities, then they're going to be more likely to be in good spirits when they're with you, and to understand that interactions with you are pretty rewarding. You want to be genuine and descriptive when you're doing these praises. So don't just give a praise for the sake of giving a praise, but be genuine. Be like, you know what, like, I really love that you're trying to do this because, um, you've come a long way. I don't know, like it can be, wow, you're getting up on your own now, or you're finishing your entire glass of milk. Like, I love that. A lot of things that you were working on perhaps 3 months ago or a month ago may have seemed like things that were pretty unattainable at once. And now, because your child has made progress, we end up taking them for granted. So try to, always remind them, like, hey, you've come a long way. You're doing very good. And even though there's things that we're working on, you're still making a lot of progress in other areas. And then, um, you know, be descriptive with the praise. So always be specific as to what it is that you're trying to provide reinforcement for, so that the child knows exactly what they're supposed to do next time. So if you're telling somebody that you love how they were able to lower their tone of voice when they were upset, that's great, because now they know that that's exactly what they need to do next time. If you just say, hey, great job, they'll be like, okay, cool, but what does that mean? Like, what did I do good? So make sure that you always follow that with a description. And then try to use the pivot praise, where you're going to ignore inappropriate behaviors and attend to the other um, presentation set students. And I apologize for that, but the siblings, for instance, you could be an example of this. So like, if your child is doing something inappropriate at the table, or they're playing with their food or something like that, then one of the things that you can do is that you can ignore that inappropriate behavior, and you can attend to your other sibling, your other children that are behaving very well and are doing things appropriately. And in this way, you're not pointing out the negative stuff, and you're not calling them out. You're not saying, hey, you're doing a bad job. Instead, you're just saying, hey, look, if you want attention, you got to do exactly what I'm pointing out that other people are doing. And then I'm going to give you just the same level of attention. Then in terms of delivering the instructions, one of the things that you want to do is that you want to come down to the child's eye level. So you want to make it very easy to communicate with them. You want to take into account everything, whether it's their field of vision, whether it's their hearing abilities. Some of our children may have some problems with their ears, where they've had some infections and things like that. So be mindful of that. You may have to come closer to them when you're giving them instructions so they can hear you clearly. Also, because of our kids not being able to maybe multitask, by you coming to their eye level, you're able to actually connect with them a little bit more. They can understand, okay, that this person's talking to me. They're not just talking to someone else. Because just by you saying, I don't know, Alex, I asked you to clean your room, even though you're in your mind, you're going like, I'm being very specific. I'm calling him by his name. In reality, there could be many Alexes in this world. And so if you want your Alex to know that you're talking to them, come to their eye level, look at them, put their little hands in your face or something like that, so they engage with you, and then you can give them the instruction. Again, you're going to use language that matches their ability, and you're going to keep the instruction as simple as possible, and hopefully as consistent, so they know what to expect. So even though they may have some, difficult time processing the instruction, if you keep it the same every time, then they're more likely to process it a little bit faster, because now they know what to expect. You may repeat the instruction once, but then after that, you want to move through a prompting hierarchy to promote the respondent. So you don't want to fall into this game where you say, go clean your room, and then 2 minutes later you say, I told you to clean your room. and then we spend 15 minutes where we're saying, go clean your room, because what the child's going to learn is that it always takes you 15 minutes to make them clean their room. So instead, what you want to do is say, okay, go clean your room. You do allow them, like, maybe a minute or so. Maybe they were busy finishing something. Maybe they were processing what you said. And then after that, you'd be like, okay, it's time to clean their room. And then you can help them transition to that activity. Always follow through with your instructions. In order for them to, realize that whatever you say, it's going to be real. So let's say if you're promising a certain kind of reward or something like that, you're going to have to be able to follow with your instructions. If you say that, if you get up and come with me, I'm going to give you access to your favorite toy, then you have to do that. Even if the child got up, came with you, and then they didn't do what they asked them to do, because all you said was if they get up and come with you, you would give them access to the toy. So be mindful of these things. Be mindful of what you're promising, and be mindful of delivering that as you promise as soon as possible. We want that delivery to be within 5 seconds of maybe even less of what the child is engaging in, so there's a connection. And so if, for instance, you're promising, I'm going to give you ice cream if you do your homework, and you have to go out and buy the ice cream, then don't promise that, okay? Instead, promise something that you have available, and then that, that other reward can be something that you can implement as part of a larger contingency later on, maybe at the end of the week. There needs to be something that's immediate always, okay, in order for it to be successful. And then always choose your battles. That's always going to be important. Like we were saying before, there's going to be times when you're going to be very busy with your other children. You're going to be busy with work now that you're working from home, and just be mindful of that. Don't take on stuff that you're not going to be able to handle at the time, because you don't want to end up that affecting the problem behavior. If you're not going to be able to make somebody follow through with a task, like doing the work or something like that, then don't present it, because then the child's going to learn that, you're going to present something, but they're not going to really have to do it. And it's okay. You don't have to feel pressure or bad if you don't always have the time to pick on these battles. Rather, just be realistic and determine, when am I able to do this? And just pick a time when you can do it, so that you can do a good job at it, all right? Another thing that you want to do is that you want to identify the difference between high and low probability behaviors. And the high probability ones are going to be things that are mastered. One example of that can be giving a high five. It can be counting to 5 or counting to 10, whatever it may be. It's going to look very, very different for each child, but it's definitely going to be stuff that they seem to do for everyone. So it doesn't matter who asked them. Like if someone says like, oh, sing this song with me. If it's something that they respond to, no matter who asks them to do it, sibling, grandma, yourself, then that's a master skill. If it's something that they're still kind of like sometimes do, sometimes they don't do, then that would fall under a low probability one. And those are not the ones we want to use all the time. So the low probability are what we're going to define them as target skills. So these are things that we're still learning. And so we're not going to use things that we're still learning as a way to create engagement from the person, because we don't know that the success of the rate of this happening is going to be pretty high. And so let's keep that in mind going forward, because the next thing that we're going to talk about is that something that we call behavior momentum. And so one of the things that you can do to engage your child in work, let's say, or in following commands, is that you can present a series of high probability behaviors and then follow those by low probability ones. And so if you were here from the beginning, I was talking about how sometimes when you're doing work, let's say like a worksheet, you can introduce high probability behaviors before the low probability ones. And that could be something like get a paper, that's a one-step instruction that they can do very easily, let's say. And another one can be write your name on the paper. And those are instances where they can get a token or something like that. And, they're being successful. So you're being like, okay, great job. We're off to a great start. And then you can present something that's a little bit more challenging. Okay, how much is 2 plus 2? And then after the child does that, you can be like, okay, great job doing 2 plus 2 equals 4. Great. Now, what's 1 plus 1? You're gonna be like, that's very easy. And then you're like, that's 2. Okay, and you'll be like, great, oh my God, you're so smart. And then maybe you present another challenging one. And you kind of start playing around with that so that not only are you spreading out some of the challenging things, but you're also maximizing the amount of time that they're getting reinforcement from you. And so again, try to make this as much fun as possible for them. Don't worry so much about becoming your child's teacher now. Now that you're dealing with everything that's going on with the virtual school, don't feel like now you have to teach them the entire curriculum. Don't worry about that. All you want to do is to have your child engaged and be happy, okay? And we understand that work is not about always being happy, but we'll cross that bridge later. We can work on extending the amount of time that they do challenging work. But what we want, first and foremost, is for you to have a home where everything's working as smooth as possible. And in order to do that, you may have to be doing things that are a little bit more simple for them. The other thing that you can do is you can use what we call the pre-MAC principle. So you can make the high probability task contingent on the completion of the low probability task. And so we show a sample during the visual part of the presentation where we had a first end board, where you can have something like, let's say, first we're going to play with the baby, like if you're working on some, play skills and things like that, and then you can and then you get access to the favorite cars. Maybe if you're trying to teach how to play appropriately with something, you can be like, first we're going to throw the car down the ramp, and then we're going to spin the wheels. So this could be like a good example of maybe how some of our children may love to engage with certain toys in an appropriate way, and we're trying to get them to do things a little bit different. And so we have to be mindful of that and not only expect them to not engage in the behavior that they want, but rather start little by little promoting the alternative one and reinforcing a lot for the alternative one, so that hopefully they end up engaging in that one quite much more than they do on the one that we're trying to decrease. And then in terms of the contingency statement and advance warnings, I spoke a little bit about this earlier as well, but whenever possible, you want to explain to the child using the language that matches a receptive level, of course, that what are going to be the rules of their behavior. And so, for instance, you can use the first then statements, or you can use an if then statement, which we gave some examples of, and we had, we showed the visuals. But also you want to provide advance warnings, especially during the transitions. Like we mentioned before, you want to make sure that you're going from high probability behaviors to low probability. So you want to make sure that you're doing this when you're going from high probability behaviors to low probability behaviors. So if you're gonna, let's say, go from, like we mentioned before, something that they really desire to another activity that maybe is a little bit more challenging, then you can give an advance warning. But however, like I did mention, also keep in mind that you want to make it where it's not so drastic, because most likely if the child's going for something that's very preferred to something that's completely non-desired, the advance warning really won't help too much, okay? And then in terms of the token boards, we also talked a little bit about this, and so we want to say what the child is working for at the beginning of the task, and this is always going to be like this. And so just because yesterday we worked for Spider-Man doesn't mean that today we're going to work for Spider-Man. And so every single day before every single task, we're going to go over what we're working at, what we're going to be working for, okay? And then we're going to provide one token, and that's going to be contingent on appropriate response. We're going to be the ones defining that appropriate response. That appropriate response may change over time. So today, an appropriate response may be, raising your, maybe looking up when you have a question. Tomorrow, an appropriate response may be raising your hand. And then the day after, an appropriate response may be raising your hand and then bringing it back down after you raised it. So this is going to change over time, okay? But the idea is that you're going to provide reinforcement after every single time that they do something that's that you have determined to be appropriate, and that's something that you're working for. Then you're going to deliver the descriptive praise as soon as you give the token. So the token is always going to be coming company with that praise, because you want the token to have some value. At the beginning, when you present the token may not have much value in itself, and you're going to have to be the one to give it some value, because the token is going to be what signals that attention is coming, that verbal praise is coming along with that token visual. And then when the child has earned all the tokens, you want to provide access to the preferred item or activity that was promised at the beginning. Keep in mind that at the beginning, you may have to work with how many tokens they need to do, and maybe you may have to bring, sort of like bring in some easy tasks also to get them to achieve the amount of tokens that maybe you place at the beginning, because you want them to encounter reinforcement. So a token board is not going to be of any use if at the beginning you need to earn 5 tokens and your child's only able to earn 3 every time, because then they're never going to know that leads to reinforcement. And so you want to make it where, like, the first week or first 2 weeks, they always seem to get the 3 tokens or the 5 tokens. So make it easy enough for them to learn how that process works. And then once they have it all down, then you can start making it a little bit harder for them to earn them, because then they'll know what they're missing. Other strategies that you can use is always offer choices, so that the child doesn't feel like you're making decisions for them, and they feel like they have a voice. A lot of times in general, all decisions are made for these children, so you want to be the one to kind of like give them a voice and give them the opportunity to decide what it is that they want to work for, or even in some cases, for more advanced contingencies, they can even choose what their consequences are for certain things. And that sometimes is very good. So keep that in mind. Also, breaking down difficult tasks into easier components. If you know that we're having a hard time doing any of the chores around the house, then maybe think about how we can break that into easier tasks through a task analysis. If you don't have an idea of how to start that, you can just Google whatever name of the activity is, and put next to a task analysis, and you get a lot of samples on Google, okay? And then if you still seem to be having a hard time with that, you can let us know, and we'll be happy to assist you with that. Also, provide opportunities for the child to actively respond. So, you always want to make them, give them the opportunity to participate. So even if your child doesn't seem to initiate a lot and they have a hard time kind of like starting, whether it's participating during schoolwork, or whether it is just in general during like social play, like at home or something like that, then be the one to kind of like facilitate that opportunity where they're kind of like forced into initiating something, so that they are more likely to be engaged and encounter the reinforcement. If they're just sitting like back and kind of like in the, sort of like behind the scenes, and they're not going to be able to encounter the reinforcement, and they're not going to learn why it's so beneficial to maybe, use their language, or maybe make an effort in like taking turns with kids or appropriately, or whatever it may be. And then obviously adjust the frequency of the delivery of the demands. And so make sure that you're not placing demands all day, as opposed to giving access to maybe free play, or giving access to reinforcement. So it can just be all demands. And remember that anything basically where you're giving somebody a command is a demand. So it's very hard not to be giving demands all the time, but try to catch yourself, so that you're not always telling them like, sit up straight, or be quiet, or, try to kind of minimize those. Sometimes one of the ways that you can do that is that you can have visuals set up around the house, whether it's with the rules or things like that. So you can refer to the visuals as opposed to be given the verbal command, so that you're not constantly paired with being that negative, being the one that's giving that negative delivery of information, where like the child's not doing something appropriate. And then obviously we talked about making sure that you're switching back and forth between hard tasks and easy ones, and following through with your instructions. Now, remember, always, 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 you want to reassess your environments. Your environment is always going to change. Behavior is always changing. So even when we come up with a great intervention, a great alternative behavior, and we have the function figured out and everything, your child may 3 weeks later discover a different way to fulfill that function through an inappropriate behavior. And so don't feel bad. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It just means that, behavior is constantly changing. And so should we. We need to just keep going at it and keep figuring out ways to address whatever challenges come at us. We talked a little bit about practicing mock scenarios. And so, just to kind of like give a brief summary of that, you want to do it during enough times and you want to model the behavior, provide the feedback, and then reinforce. So those are the three main aspects of practicing the mock scenarios. And then some of the things that I always tell parents that they can practice are skills like waiting, requesting for more, or even asking for attention. Those are things that happen quite often throughout the day. So if these are skills that your child doesn't still have, these would probably be good ones to start targeting during off time so they can get better at that. And hopefully this can decrease some of their problem behaviors. And then just remember that every case is going to be unique. And so we can go over this presentation a million times, but you may have questions that haven't been addressed here because, they're very specific to your child, to your home, and we're happy to help you with those. You don't have to necessarily feel like now you're left with no questions answered. So instead, if you feel like you still have more questions, like maybe we didn't touch upon something that's very specific to your current situation, then please contact us. Contact your case manager directly if you have the information. Or if not, you can let us know at the end of the presentation and we'll be happy to connect you with that person, or we'll be happy to assist you ourselves. Then for some families that don't know, even though things are a bit hectic right now, you can still receive support from Miami-Dade County Public Schools. The ASD support office is still working. And so if you have specific things that are related to the ASD instruction of your child when it comes to Miami-Dade County Public School, let us know and we'll try to help you connect with the team so they can assist you, okay? And then of course, if you're having some really challenging behaviors, then you should always talk to your certified behavior analyst. I think as a general rule, you should always talk to whatever agency you have. But obviously, if you're having really challenging behaviors, they should be addressing those. If you have a situation where you've had problem behavior, and whatever provider you have has seen, they haven't been able to get it to diminish or anything over some period of time, please let us know so that we can see if there's anything that we can do to further assist or maybe give some guidance as to what are some strategies that they can do so that they can start making some changes when it comes to that. There are some additional resources. I have this link here for the Padlet. I will go ahead and provide this link in the chat so you guys can all access it. And then anyways, you're gonna have my information so you can email me if you have any questions about the presentation anyways, okay? But this is gonna be a link, and let me see. I could open it, but I don't think I'm gonna be, let me see if I can share it with you guys. I will have to share that other screen so I can show you how it looks. Give me 1 second. Okay, so here we go. So this is what the this link looks like. So this is the visual support. So you're gonna have different options here that you can go through and sort of, let's say if we're doing classroom visuals, if you need those for the home, then you can look in the Padlet and see a lot of different things that you can use. And so feel free to navigate through these, see if there's anything useful for you. It's taking a little bit of time to load, and I don't want to get too caught up on this, but I just wanted you to see you do have stuff here on also some of the choice words that we were talking about and things like that, first in and things like that, okay? So you don't even have to do Google searches for a lot of these things. We already have them set up for you. Okay. And so let me go back to the PowerPoint. And so the other thing that I wanted to share with you guys is that you can also, and you should be, accessing our newsletter. We're always advertising any trainings that we're giving through there, any parent support groups that we're giving through there. So if you're still not receiving our newsletter, we are still sending it on Fridays right now. And everything, we've gone totally virtual, and we're actually offering quite a range of services. So if you haven't gotten it, go on our website, umcar.org, and on the right-hand corner at the top, you're gonna see the option for signing up for our newsletter. Okay, if you try and sign up and it tells you that the email's already in it, but you're not receiving it, then go in your spam folder. You're probably receiving all of our emails into your spam. You just need to allow that to go into your inbox, okay? If you need any ABA referrals, if you recently changed insurances, if your provider is no longer providing services during this time of need, let us know. We'll be happy to give you referrals. We have a full database, and we can give you quite a few options for you to choose from, okay? And then just be on the lookout. We have more parent trainings coming up. We have a potty training coming up next week that we have already offered, but we're gonna go ahead and offer it again for those of you who may have missed it. So it's gonna be next Tuesday at 5 p.m. It's gonna give some skills on how to do toilet training at home. We also have a training series that's coming up on behavior that's a little bit more extensive. It's a mini series. It's gonna be 3 trainings, so 3 Fridays in a row. And that's gonna start, I believe, on Friday the 24th, if my schedule doesn't fail me. And correct, yes, on the 24th, going to May 1st and then May 8th. That's gonna be in English at 5 p.m. And then it's gonna be in Spanish at 6:30 p.m. So if you know of anybody that could benefit from that, if you yourself wanna do it, we have it on our calendar on our website, and you just have to register through Eventbrite in order to be able to get the link to access that, okay? There are a few services that we offer that we're not, they're maybe kind of like lagging right now. We have what we call the Free Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, or PCIT. PCIT was offering remote therapy already before this whole one started happening, but they did have a waiting list that was a bit extensive. So I don't know how much you would have to wait to start receiving these services. If you're interested a little bit more about this, you can let me know and I can send you the flyer and you can contact them. This is something that's free of charge. You don't have to pay for anything. You may just have to wait quite some time in order to get in line to receive those services. And then we also provide a training. This one's not free. This is called the ACT, and this is like more dedicated parent training. This is also something that has been offered via Skype before. We might probably offer again. So if you're interested in this, I can give you the contact information for the person that's in charge of this program. This one is a fee for pay. For those of you that haven't done so already, please register for Spark. It's a genetic study that we're conducting alongside many other universities in the nation. It's very easy to do. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to leave your home. Everything will be mailed to to yourself, and then you can just send back. They just collect a saliva sample, and you do a little bit of fill out a form online that takes about 20 minutes or so. If you do so, they can notify you anything that they find out in terms of any genetic markers related to autism, and then they will let you know if they find anything negative in terms of your genetic code. If you do so, you will be contributing to collecting 50,000 samples across the US to have a better understanding of what are the genes that come to play in autism. Right now, they estimate there should be about 400 different markers, and they only know about 70 of them. So if you feel like you want to contribute to this, then feel free to access that website listed there, or let us know and we can have somebody contact you and help you through the process, okay? Now, I'm gonna stop here with the presentation. We're gonna go ahead and take any questions that you may have. And I'm gonna leave you this link here, this QR code for the training evaluation form so that you can complete that once we're finished answering the questions, okay? If you have any trouble with this QR code with your phone, then just let us know and we're gonna put the link on the chat. Okay, do you have any questions, Animal?
No, I think we're happy to stick around with you guys and answer any questions that you might have. If you don't want to ask questions in this group format and you would like some individual consultation, we're also happy to help you with that. We're happy to meet with you privately, one-on-one. We actually have students in the ABA program who would be very happy to join us and help with the consultation. So don't hesitate if you have questions. If you need a little bit of support, if you need a little bit of help. The things that Ivan went over, I think are really helpful. I know it's a lot of information, so if you want to take some time and then come back to us. And also, I want to just mention that if you feel like you heard things in the presentation that you're like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm doing that, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Whatever behavior has been learned or maybe has been reinforced, you don't have to feel bad about it. We can help you with that. And maybe right now is not the greatest time to take on some of these challenges. We're all just trying to survive. So we just don't want you to feel bad about that. Or you might say, this is the best time. Let me handle it now. So either way, we're here to support you, and just reach out to us. Let us know if you have any questions or if you need any help. We're here for you. And you can type questions in on the chat, or you can reach out to Ivan or myself over email, and we can schedule a time to talk.
So I'm gonna give like maybe another minute for the questions, and if not, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. And also, please let us know if you have any difficulty getting into the training evaluation form. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.